when we started on Junebug Jack, we probably, a lot of our early grants focused on the creation of the work. And I hope you have an opportunity now with this maybe somewhat shift in the funders to conceive of the whole project, so that you're not driven by the funding to just create the work. Because it's really the managerial part, which I would rename the organizing part, which is this organizing all these communities around the country, or helping to get that in orbit, if you look at it that way. And then the process out. So I mean, it would be really good if you could raise money that the creation of the work was set within, but allowed you to do all this community organizing work and the follow-through. And so I would try to, to conceive it big. Because the danger, of course, with this funding situation always is you get one little piece, right? And you don't even get enough of a piece to make the work. So like you do a little piece on the work, and then 9 months later you get another piece and you can do the work. And you don't have the whole organizing piece at all. That gets left out. And it just becomes piecemeal. And before you know it, it's like 4 years down the road, and you just are getting your piece up, and you haven't had enough money to do the other parts in sync and that kind of thing. So maybe you should just go big, bold, conceive of it as this big national project that's and try to raise money there.
And in your mind, who would fund that?
Well, we were just talking, the Ford Foundation's sort of shifting that way.
They've shifted really out of funding art.
Yeah, but the way that they describe their stuff, there's definitely a way that a project like this fits into it, where it's about, institutions like solidifying their future. So if it's, a center like Asian Arts Initiative saying this is pivotal to the sustenance of our future by engaging with our community in this way, if that is what you kind of exploit for those purposes, that's absolutely true of this project, and then it can have national impact in that way. Then this project and you as artists become an agent to help those organizations, those places, those centers look at their future in that way. You're a collaborator on them doing that, for sure.
Yeah, I've had a lot of conversations with Ford Foundation, from the president to Orlando and Roberta and so forth in the last months. And the way Orlando, who is an award-winning filmmaker, he says, the way he put it is that Ford no longer is making an award-winning film going to be enough. What they're looking at is transformation, community change, community empowerment. And we just did this big study on community cultural development, which is the broad term we're using culture to develop communities. It's like it's this huge, powerful piece that nobody's tuned into. As we've all gone to our corners, the organizers have forgotten the role of art and culture. The artists have forgotten how they need community organizers. It's all fractured, right? So Ford is going to be trying to put that back together around change, transformation, community transformation. Community problem solving is the way we're doing it in a foundation I work with. We've completely refocused one of our areas to community problem solving. And we're going to spend 10 years helping communities increase their capacity to solve problems. And the arts is going to have to figure out how it can contribute to that goal. And we've got metrics. So like right now in our communities in Minnesota, North and South Dakota, 50% of the people say our community is sometimes successful at solving their problems. In 10 years, we're driving to 75% of the people in the community saying we as a community can solve our problems. So, you know, that's race and class are right at the center of that, of community issues.
And I think it's very useful information to have about what the foundation people are doing and all that. I think it's very useful. But I think it's more useful later. That, you know, if anybody, whether this project or any other, we carve out our strategy and our goals, which is where I see us sitting there. If we define our goals in terms of what philanthropy is interested in, we'll be doing what philanthropy is interested in, not necessarily what we're interested in. So I think it's really crucial to start by saying what it is we want to do. And certainly that has to track along with what's possible, but I really think, you know, it's key. Dudley, I'm mixing you up, another white guy I know.
We all saw this.
My friend Alan Jaffe, the late Alan Jaffe, said there's some bargains that you can't afford. And I was dead broke at the time.
So that made no sense to you.
So I said, like what, Alan? He said, something you don't want. No matter how cheap it is, you know, you can't afford it because you don't want it anyway. And so I think that's really important. I think there's another thing. In a country as wealthy and as rich as this is, there will always be resources for whatever it is you really want to do. You may not get it on the terms or at the time or on the schedule and so forth, but something is going to be there when we get ready for it. I think we just have to be clear about what it is we're trying to get to. And that's what I think.
Yeah, I agree in the sort of general about that, but already you're raising money. So I'm saying I would look at the big.
I agree with your strategy. I agree with strategic concern.
And also, you know, one of the lessons out of Junebug-A.B.E.E. is that we figured something out, and then we're really not able to take it to scale, to its full scale and full test. And there's a saying the old people in this field have, which is that the field of art and social justice is littered with its successes. If you look at the last 30 years, so much was figured out that it's just sitting there rusting because it never found a way to go to scale. And I mean, it started for me right in the 70s. I saw these amazing plays coming up. One, Robbie McCauley's Indian Blood. I said, that play needs to go to every high school in the South. And it would have had, I just knew, I could feel it, what a strong effect that would have. And we had no means
to make that happen.
Make it happen. And so a lot of it has been in the distribution, a lot of the frustration. Mm-hmm. So maybe it's just, as part of your strategy, really keep thinking about this distribution and the large thing you want to do. Now, when we began this Zuni project, we made one smart move at the get-go, which we said it would be a 25-year project. So we committed to 25 years of working on together. So that changed the whole dynamic. And now we're at 28 years, you know, so we've extended. And because we took that time frame, something was able to happen that could have never happened otherwise, which was the first Zuni language theater was created, and the one of the Appalachian Zuni plays we made together is the standard text for teaching written Zuni, which the alphabet wasn't invented until 1975. So instead of Dick and Jane, you have an Appalachian Zuni play that is now the standard text for all Zuni people of learning written Zuni. So, you know, the impact of that will go for decades.
Generations.
Yeah, and for generations. But it's because we said 25 years. And of course, from a Native American perspective, we only say, we see a lot of shit happen in 300 with a stretch of his head, brother.
That's just a spit.
How many of you are involved in that?
In that city work?
Yeah.
Oh, well, our whole community and their whole community, because it had all this exchange, we had all the kids from Zuni coming and falling in love with the Appalachian boys and girls, and then back and forth.
Well, who was at the table that said, we're signing on for 25 years of this
Pardon?
right now?
Who said it then?
Who made the commitment to 25 years?
We did, Roadside and our Zuni leaders there. And it's a real funny story. The way we got them going is we would be out touring nationally, and we'd have a couple of down days, and I'd say, well, let's go visit my friends over in Zuni Kickback. It's interesting because they have great storytelling, this, that, and the other. And anyway, I just had friends there. It's someplace different to go. So we'd go over there, and as soon as we get there, of course, they made us go perform in the schools, and the kids were having so much fun listening to these big Appalachian stories, these archetypal stories, that just embarrassed the Zunis that they had let their own great stories go under. So that was how it got going. They said, damn, our kids are just falling out of their chairs at these Appalachian stories. Where are our stories? They had the same kind of stories, you know, but they, you know, and that's what got them going. But we were just trying to kick back. But you know how that is. And then old Tommy Bledsoe, who looked exactly like ZZ Top. I'll never forget, we were sitting up there watching traditional dances on top of the Pueblo down in the plaza. And one Zuni teenager turned to the other and said, ZZ Top. You know, could be. The other said, what would ZZ Top be doing here in Zuni? Yes, I don't know.
That's good stuff.
It occurs to me that also we will be spending some time amongst ourselves grappling with this idea of, like you're saying, what are the specific roles of the people in the room? But while we have you gentlemen here, that maybe we want to talk about what the possibilities of mentorship here are, and what do you see as a mentor, and what do we see as a mentor, and because that may indeed affect the way we proceed in terms of roles. And
I'm still trying to understand what the fuck a Baba is.
Okay. All right.
And I call you all the time, you're like, oh.
Yeah.
What the fuck a Baba is? Do we got that on tape?
That's the next title of
But you
it.
can say it again.
What the fuck a Baba is.
I think we need a t-shirt.
Yeah.
What the fuck a Baba is.
Well, but it's exciting to think about just sharing work and whatever it is, you know, and to feel like we're going to structure it over a term rather than just hit and miss, you know. My own agenda right now is to try to stabilize Junebug Productions and to make it, to codify what we've been trying to do, and to find new leadership for it. I'm very happy with what I think we found in Terry and Kyoko. Although I think Kyoko's long-term view is not yet developed about what she wants for herself. And so that's a big question. I keep prodding her on, what are you trying to do? And she has trouble, but there's no rush to answer these questions. You know, it's just, if you don't answer for yourself, somebody's going to answer for you. You know, so it's a question in her interest actually that I want her to answer. But and we're going to be looking for a new artistic director, because my game is to write. I mean, that's what I got into this work for. And I realized... By God,
I'll go out saying that.
I'll go out too. But I do know this, that if I don't get to it pretty soon, I will go out having said it.
Soon won't be soon enough.
And so our big strategy is a transitional one, you know, from founder and old leadership to a new role or a new leadership. And so that's what I'm going to be doing. Anytime anybody has interest in a writing project, have pen will travel. So I'm going to be interested in that. But I'm also really interested that while we're sitting downstairs, Jamie was and Dudley were talking about the history of the arts movement and how it's been fragmented and broken up so that people don't know what that history is and don't know, and so therefore the history does not inform what we do and the choices we make, decisions that we make. So, you know, there's a great need for that, including what you're doing right now in terms of documenting the road that you're on. And at some point, if you know somebody decides to do it, it's important that somebody take some time studying the big picture that this kind of work fits into and helps to create. I happen to believe that it's the most important kind of work that's going on in the arts, certainly in this country, and perhaps elsewhere. The whole future of the human race, as suggested by the apocalyptic scenario, the future of humankind is contingent, is certainly not contingent on the regional theater, the dance experience of what's been going on the last, in the dominant, in the mainstream, all of the mainstream things. Those are songs, those are swan songs, you know, songs that come on the way to the elephant graveyard, you know. I mean,
to mix the metaphor.
Yeah, just to mix the metaphor a little bit. But you know, we're living in a decadent culture that is dying, which is why the apocalyptic thing is not entirely off key to my ear. But I don't necessarily think that it's like the evangelicals are talking about, where the rapture is going to come down and God is going to come down in the sky Gabriel's going to sound the trumpet.
We do have a trumpet.
Yeah, but it can't be heard around the world without the technology. And people gonna come up from the grave. I don't think some people believe that. I don't. But I do think that there are no guarantees that just because we've built this huge social and economic instrument that now pollutes the world with all kinds of waste that we don't even know what to do with. I don't think there's any guarantee that humanity will survive, you know? In fact, if we keep on the course we're on, I think it's the contrary. The guarantee tends to run in favor of, you know, the transformation of human life from what it is to something we cannot now imagine. So I think the kind of art that concerns these kind of questions is going to be a lot more valuable than Shakespeare was. Because when you think about it, what Shakespeare did was sort of comment on and catalog the transition from the aristocracy to bourgeois democracy. You know, that's the notion that the kings and queens were the corporal representations of God on earth, and therefore could do no wrong, a la Nixon, who said if the governor does it, or the president does it, it can't be wrong. You know, that notion, and Shakespeare comes along and, you know, gets the British Empire to line up behind his songs about, you know, that transition. And
the transition from
the
God
as
to the bourgeois.
Yeah, and you know, who suddenly realized that those kings were human too, and that any individual from that class could do the same things that kings were doing. In fact, could do it more and better. You know. But now that whole thing is turning to salt. All those statues are just falling down. And the notion of permanent, you know, yeah, permanent divinity in flesh it's not there. And what's going to be is up. I think our work is about
Visualizing.
about what we see happening as we build that new way of being in the world, you know?
Did you all inherit Shakespeare as the epitome, paragon?
Yes. Of course, that's what it was taught.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, there's, I agree with John. You were talking about a book, really a book I like so much called Morality Tale by Barry Unsworth, British writer. And it's about, it's brief, and I suggest reading it in the winter. And it's about the moment when this traveling group of thespians doing morality tales turns to the psychological, to the actual community. Exactly what John's talking about. One of the things that W.H. Auden spotted in Shakespeare was that because just of this transition John's talking about, Shakespeare had this moment with language when it was, he had a common language of the people. It wasn't just the language, the special language of the aristocracy, Latin, for example, that the church was in. In other words, there was a lingua franca, the common language that was rich in poetry, and that he happened to land at that moment which goes to John's point of trying to understand the historical moment we're in, which is so determinate, is what we would say. That the moment you're in is very determinate about what the possibilities are. And Shakespeare had the good luck to get, I mean, he had the genius to take the language, but the good luck to have that moment. Somebody was going to do it. And, you know, as Bob Dylan said, Shakespeare was in the alley, so he did it. And, you know, so it's just a sort
What's
of...
the guy's name?
Barry Unsworth. So, you know, what is the moment? You know, what's the moment now? And that's what we're describing. In terms of the role of mentorship, I don't know. I mean, the roadside piece, what we're doing right now is trying to make our footprints really clear so that whoever comes along 30 years from now will be able to look at all of our work, and it'll be spelled out what we were thinking, how our methodologies and so forth and so on. So we're not trying to pass on the company to individuals, but rather to pass on the ideas and methodologies and let the individual, I mean, I look at what you're doing as part of Roadside Theater, coming up in a new incarnation, what Thousand Kites is doing. You know, it's not like this, you got to come to Whitesburg and I got to pass it on like that.
But I do that too.
Yeah, you do that too. But so, I mean, I'm working with a lot of young people. I mean, that's where I'm focused, is working with people who want to learn about the work. And the one thing I know, I agree with John that sometimes a nice structure is good, so it's iterative, so that we know, okay, at this stage phase, which is going to occur in X period of time, there will be another click in, right? Some role for us to play, where the role's in. Another thing I know is that nothing really substitutes for getting down and, you know, doing the work together. You learn more about each other doing something, you know, whatever it is, actually making something, whether it's, you know, making a theory or a play or anything. So, I would just say I don't have any big theories about what a mentor should be, or I don't even use the word. I'm just, interested in, being available to however. And I think it has to be, you all have to take a lot of the leadership in that, because you're going to be thinking about it more intentionally than John and I. And you need to think about how you can use us. I mean, that's what I'd say, how you could use me.
I know one thing that had come up in a meeting that we had the other day. Dudley was, and also Kyoko had raised it, and John had raised it at a point. I know a lot more about John's schedule than yours, but I definitely know everyone's pressed for time. And John, maybe Kyoko had called for the other day, just being clear about what was being asked of you in terms of time. And that was where we had come back to this idea of thinking again, like, we need to get clear on what we're asking of someone, because, it's one thing to sign up to be a mentor and want to do the work, and then there's another thing when you start getting asked to do things that are beyond the realms of time that you have, that exist. I don't foresee that being a problem, but
It won't.
yeah.
But definitely we have some benchmarks that we've tried to set for ourselves throughout the course of this year, and where we want to be in places that we feel we would really like to check back in with you and John. And of course we have John here locally, so we'll be able to, he's a lot more accessible to do stuff face to face, but that there'll be some places specifically in the early fall as we get to around, we're going to do another retreat, a longer real retreat in July, and we've carved out 2 weeks that we'll spend together. That we'll spend I guess a bulk of that time going over what we've discovered in these different sessions that we've done. We've got New York scheduled for May. We've got Mississippi scheduled for May, and then we've got Minneapolis. Look like it's going to be scheduled for early July. So the last 2 weeks of July is like we have carved out that we'll probably spend a lot of that time, reflecting on what we've learned and what the things that we're pulling out, what are the through lines, what are the, the tidbits and different chunks, and moving into a draft form of what this might look like when it's complete. But also some time between now and then that we'll be stealing together to just continue brainstorming. We did a brainstorming session about 3 weeks ago. I think it was like mid-February, where we just spent a few hours just throwing out a topic, or just hitting a theme or a phrase, and then imagining what that would look like on stage, how you would present it, or how you would present it to the community, and came up with some really good stuff. Of course we won't use all of it, but it gives us some really good ideas about the possibilities of what this can be. We're also where I think you could be really instrumental is in the crafting of the type of curriculum framework that goes with the project. So there's like, how do we, what are the tools, and what are those tools that really identify what we're trying to do? Once we get this language down, how do we craft that into something that can be usable by communities, whether they're the universities, community centers, whatever, art, activist organizations, that we craft something that can be used, that is multi-purpose, kind of workbook or guidebook. We don't know what it looks like, but I think that's something that you have a lot of experience with, that we would probably call on you to help guide us through, or at least give some pointers. That's just off the top of my head.
The big thing I'm worried about with the project right now is that you don't have somebody designated who's going to worry about the community organizing piece. They need to be at least sitting in part of all that creative part, where you're just listening with another head, with another hat on. Okay, I mean, because it's a whole piece. It's probably, if in the Junebug Jack, it was 2/3 of the project, and the community organizing part.
Who's the community organizer?
Yeah, that's the problem. We didn't. That's what I'm saying. We
You didn't have. A
no, we had.
person.
We didn't. And if we'd have designated and conceived of it, I mean, we knew the conception, but we didn't conceive of it, or we didn't see the possibility or whatever. We never raised the money for the full-blown thing. So we knew there had to be a community organizer, and that was by turns Teresa. That was sometimes by turns somebody in Roadside, because we had a lot of capacity. We'd already gotten to that, but we just never could bring that position to full scale, because see, if that position, let's just talk about this project now. If you had that person right now sitting in here, say I talked to Kyoko about it, whether that was something she was interested in. She said, yeah, that would be an amazing job. If you had somebody sitting in, they would be thinking right now, okay, and not only the content of what you all are talking about, how that's going to be used in organizing, they would be thinking, okay, now how do we conceptualize this with the organizing piece and try to raise a huge pot of money for the full conception rather than just the breakout. So they would just, you all to some degree are going to be focused on making the piece like we were, and that's intense. But there's this other piece of work that has to happen simultaneously. And it's just been my experience, unless somebody is designated to just think about that, then it'll get, it'll get a little left over, pushed on the side.
That's why you stepped out of Uprooted.
Why what?
Carlton stepped out of Uprooted as an artist and worked as the project director and organizer.
Exactly.
So that he was but he sat through rehearsals and he was there thinking like that.
Well, so you understand it, what a big job it is. And how we've never really been able to bring that to full power. I've not seen any projects in the country that have brought that to full flower.
Do you feel strongly that this person is someone that exists on a level that can jump into the room pretty consistently and be around most of the project activities? Or can you see it? Could you conceive it with people who have expressed great interest in the project but maybe in another area of the country? You know, you're talking about sitting in the room and being there, so I'm wondering.
Yeah, I don't know how that's structured. I mean, I don't think they have to be one of you. I mean, it could be somebody from anywhere, but they're going to have to, you know, they got to understand the conception that you understand. They got to understand, they got to have a theory of community organizing, and you all have got to agree with that. You know, you've got to be on the same page with certain basic organizing principles. You know, I mean, if I were just casting around, I would look for somebody maybe with a community organizing background, but who had made a critique of community organizing and had realized that what was missing from the community organizing work was this power of culture, and wanted to take the organizing methodologies and transmute them with culture. And that's what I was working with for about 3-4 years in the Central Valley with hardcore organizers, was this transition into using culture as an organizing tool. And they all came up in the Olinsky style organizing.
Where's the Central Valley?
California. Out of Fresno. Breadbasket of the country.
It'll probably serve us in that capacity to look outside of the demographics that are in this room. I think we'll really frame it.
Explain that.
This meaning that we're we're black, white, male, right? And to just add to that pot,
well,
maybe being a woman, some other persuasion, you know what I'm saying?
This is what we ran into the other day as well in the State of the Nation meeting, is being clear about our definition of diversity and what it includes beyond color. This includes religious affiliation, race, what nationalities, because like I don't think Melissa would say she was white. She would say she's Colombian. Right. And so really also being clear about what those things are for us. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
what are we looking at in terms of our...
I'm just saying something other than us four.
I totally hear what you're saying. Yes. And somebody who knows organizing in the South might not be so hip to what's going on in the organizing in the Central Valley.
Well, organizing is, you know, depending on what school they come out of, is, you know, shares. If you're out of the IAF, Olinsky style organizing, it doesn't matter if you're in the South or Central Valley. It's the same premises, the same principles, the same theory of change, etc. You go to the same organizing trainings, and so I mean, you got to know your community. I mean, really, this idea of changing a community story about race and class is pure organizing. I mean, what you do as an organizer, just in a thumb, as you all know, is you go, if I were going into this community around here to organize, I'd just go start listening, spend months listening to people's story, individual story, and I'd find 6 people who were concerned about the same thing. I said, would you all come over to my house for dinner? I'm gonna make some gumbo. You all share this concern about some issue, and let's just hear each other's story. So then you start putting together a bigger story of the community. And then you figure out, okay, well, let's start analyzing the power dynamics that is suppressing our story or our issue, and let's organize around that. I mean, so, you know, that's classic organizing. It begins with the individual and the individual's experience, and then bringing those individuals together and how they build and sharpen one another through their own deep personal experience and sharing that, and till you come to a point of solidarity and a willingness to act because you feel empowered that you've got the story. You've been able to put the story together. It's not just me in the corner worrying about this. And that's classic organizing. And of course, what art has the ability to do, that's why we always, with those story circles, go into a performative mode, because then you can take all those stories and you can craft them into a performance and lift them up on the stage and reach, 100 times more people. And then you just got to turn back and allow them to now participate in getting their story in the next performance. And what typically happens, that was starting to happen down here when Richard Schechner came down, that thing I facilitated for 3 days. What was starting to happen was they were interested in the community story in the early stages. And then they were going to take it over and do something for New Orleans. That was, that's the way it typically goes. And you got a lot of artists in this movement who sort of say they're community artists and so forth. And they're really only interested in the community story to the point where they put their genius on it. And then it kind of becomes their work of art, but I couldn't do it without the community. Well, that's a little different than empowering the community. To just keep it's all participation.
I want to explore that language, that word.
Participation?
Empowering the community.
Mm-hmm.
And the relationship that it suggests. It's sort of like...
empowering itself.
Yeah, because it's the other word that you get is outreach. Mm-hmm. Which is predicated. We have to watch how this language sneaks into our way of describing what we do, because language is the first step of co-optation. Communities that Kalamu, your buddy Kalamu had said once, I don't know whether somebody told him or it was one of those sayings he made up, but he said, anything I give you, I can take away. And that's so true. Mm-hmm. If I empower the community by my blessing, in whatever form my blessing takes, then the community is riding off of my power. Mm-hmm. And I can take that power and invest it someplace else. And it's not accurate, moreover. It's not accurate. The community has power. Whether it recognizes and uses its power or not, it has power. And if we see ourselves as a complement to that community, we can add to that power by making our contribution to it, but it's something we join rather than create, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But our participation makes it stronger if we do well. But it's not ours either to take or to give or take away, to give or to take away. It's something collectively we create. It's like, I find myself thinking about sex so often because it's such a good metaphor. Not only because it's a good metaphor, but partly. But you don't give somebody a baby. You work together to create this new thing. And if you don't work together, what happens is destructive rather than creative, because then you start exploiting each other. And it's just so, the whole idea of community engagement as opposed to community outreach. By joining with the community, you learn from the community and the community learns from you. We learn from each other. That's a altogether different kind of relationship than me blessing you with my wisdom. You know?
I think, you know, you can look at the glossary we did if you get, that's part of that Community Cultural Development Report that we just finished. You can get it through our website. We did a whole glossary of terms to try to clarify that. We don't use outreach, but rather inreach. I mean, what a community organizer does, essentially, is help a community organize its power and backs its way up. And that's our whole methodology, borrowed from that. When we are working in communities, all we're trying to do is work our way out of a job so that the community is standing alone, and that we then, at the end of our methodology, like in Zuni, have a peer, that we collaborate as peers. You know, they didn't even have anything when we started, but they organized themselves, and now we've got a peer, and they help organize others. So it's I mean, we've done a lot, I think, because we've been in resistance all these 30 years, having to push back against the cultural definition and the cultural war sort of foisted on us, that I think we have clarified a lot of that methodology, a lot of that terminology.
What website is this?
This is, well, it's the Imagining America report, but you can get it through the Roadside website. And we just have a glossary of terms that, you know, just tries to get at the issue John's talking about, of the co-option of language. But I'm just saying, a lot of terminology, a lot of methodology is out there, is pretty clear. What isn't happening too much is people studying it and acting on it. That's what I see. In other words, I feel like we're further ahead. We've got stuff established, but it's not being taken and translated into the work to the degree it could be. So like if you look at, I don't know exactly the ins and outs of that Transformer project that takes place here, but it just seems like there's a beat off from that project and really what our methodology and what we're describing. I mean, I haven't studied it to know, but just picking up from people, there's something a little different.
It's a right angle, it's not a beat off.
Oh, it's that far?
I think so.
Yeah. And these are people, you know, that, you know, you want to count as colleagues in the field.
It's a project, to what John said, that got a significant amount of money first, and then decided what it wanted to do with that money second. And instead of, and never really even got off to a running start, kind of hobbled out of the gates. But I think in every way, information has been very scarce. They've not really publicized what their expectations are or their goals are. They created a website that no one uses. They've never at any level connected with what the people's needs were. They got a lot of money and said, we have a few good ideas, we're gonna push them forward, and this work is being led by one of the nation's most reputable visual artists right now, this guy Rick Lowe, who's hot with the funders, and he's done good work in Houston. And so that was just like a clear example of a post-Katrina project where their funders need intermediaries before they give money to New Orleans organizations directly.
Transformers,
Rick received the money from the Andy Warhol Foundation.
So yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. What you know, what this is like another of John's and our themes, which is this critical discourse. What we're basically thinking is we've lost the critical discourse. So there's no way that they should be in a strong critical discourse. There's no way they should be able to get away with that. I mean, there should be, if you had a strong critical discourse in New Orleans, people would be pushing back on it, dissecting it, taking it apart. You know,
But there's no discourse about it because it's just it's deemed irrelevant.
Yeah, okay, well.
Well, they're right next door to me and I didn't know what they do.
Yeah, so maybe they're deemed irrelevant. Well, I know I came in here for this 3-day meeting to facilitate, and I got to the meeting with these people from international people coming, Richard Schechner coming from New York, And my brother Maurice was there, observing from the back.
Bruce was there too.
Oh, is this the guy?
Yeah,
who's
from Trinidad.
Trinidad.
Transformer did that?
Maurice was rocking back on watching that.
Stop, baby.
So yeah, stop, baby. So like, you know, that thing's going down, and what's his name? One of your local guys here videoed the thing, and I said, sure, you can video it. I was facilitating it, coordinating it. I said, you can video it as long as everybody gets who wants it can get a copy of the videotape. And he wouldn't turn, he still to this day won't turn the videotape loose.
That was Jansen?
Yeah, he won't turn the videotape loose. And the reason I wanted the videotape is because it is just this document of how community process gets co-opted. And so I wanted to use it as a teaching tool. And there's no way they're going to turn that thing loose.
Right.
And that was the agreement. That was the contract. It was on a handshake.
Right.
But, you know, I've never had that happen. I've never had to, you know, go to court to get something that we allowed him to videotape. But he won't turn that thing loose. I've tried 18 times. And I mean, if we could watch that right now, as Maurice can say, Maurice was there. If we,
it was the most interesting.
it was writ large, wasn't it?
It was yes, it was. It was a trip, but it was a classic example of what happens and how it happens. You know what I'm saying? On the regular, every time. If we're there or not, this is how it's happening. The co-option of communities.
Wait, what happened? Like, what happened to this?
Well,
This guy was responsible supposedly for the opening Olympics.
Winter Olympics.
The Winter Olympics in 2006.
something like that.
You know, and so he had like this, like, you know, supposedly this fantastic show, and he was like this big, huge performance
International
visual
star.
artist.
International star.
Humongous.
He's a visionary.
And he's a white guy from Trinidad. And
White Trinidadian.
He worked all over the world.
And he worked all over the world.
He's been on 60 Minutes. He's been on Good
Right.
Morning America. Everything.
This guy's the man. You
He's
know,
the
so
man.
we need him here to help, like, you know,
Help New Orleans.
help New Orleans tell
Express
tell
their culture
story.
because they have so much problems expressing their culture.
That's right.
So his
And then
plan.
you got Richard Schechner, who's one of the main sort of thinkers in the performance field.
My
And
friend.
Our friend.
Schechner.
And Richard's brought him down under wing.
And his
Richard's
plan
gonna
was to
support
have
it.
like this giant ceremony through the streets where we would all have like this
Flags.
giant, like flags. We'd have like this giant like sheet that's like over everybody, and then
He's going to teach us how to parade.
teach us how to parade. I mean, that was most. You just kind of sitting there like kind of holding your breath there, and he had a sample of this
Of the
costume that he
Yeah,
thought was
the
going to be
music.
very easy for everybody to make, and he had this music
That
that
would
he,
never play.
and
And we
he,
were thinking, thank God it's going to be easy.
he
Because we
put
had
them
trouble
on.
putting on clothes here.
Exactly. He got up and he kind of modeled it for us how we were going to dance through the street. And no,
It was great. It was great. It was,
I think we spent 4 hours talking about this after it was over. People that wasn't even there was like, you
We
can't
caught
do
it back in Mississippi.
In Mississippi,
exactly. Oh, barbecue. But I mean, it was a full blown, and you really saw the way the politics.
Yeah, I saw part of it, but I didn't know what I was seeing.
But let's talk about how that situation got righted.
But so, in other words, we're just giving you
It
the.
hadn't gotten righted yet.
no,
has
it
it?
has been right.
Well, what happened, as I appreciate the situation about what now has become Home New Orleans, that was initially Richard's idea.
No.
And, okay,
As an error in the history.
was that Jan Bellarubia's idea and she called upon Richard to come in?
Jan Gilbert.
I'm sorry, okay, but I mean, I'm sorry, not to say that's Richard's idea. He was called in as one of the first people, the big name, to see about great garnering support for this idea. But after that meeting, the point I think is, people came to both Jan and Richard and expressed serious misgivings about that idea.
Half did, and half said this is the best thing.
Okay,
Yeah, we
but
were
the
there.
project did change after that meeting. And it became more focused on neighborhoods, and it became more focused on the actual, as I have observed Home New Orleans, New Orleanians doing the work in those neighborhoods.
But it was because they couldn't pull the money
Yes.
off for the other. I mean, Richard went to the Ford Foundation, and, you know, right before he went to the Ford Foundation, I went to the Ford Foundation and said no. You know.
Well, to Richard's credit, let me just say, Richard is my friend now. I claim him. But he met that guy on an airplane and was impressed by the guy's conversation.
No, he'd gone and seen the guy's work.
He met him on an airplane.
Yeah, I
He
know.
told me that.
That's true.
And he was impressed by that.
And then he went and saw the work and was even more impressed.
Oh, well, that I won't be responsible for that. But he did say when Jan had the idea for the Home New Orleans project, and she knew Richard when he was teaching here at 2A. And when he was working with us, he worked with the Free Southern Theater for a couple of years. And that's why they plugged in, and Richard just happened to be sitting with Margaret Wilkerson on another airplane.
Yeah, I know the whole story.
And he didn't intend to be raising money. He explicitly said he was not raising money.
I was much closer down to it. I know.
All right, you tell it.
You got Richard's version, but anyway, the point is, you got Richard's version. I talk to Richard all the time, and I got Richard. I was sitting with Richard one time. I said, Richard, your work's about social justice, and I had him just like you thought you had me that time. I had Richard. I said, your work's about social justice, right, Richard? He said, he could see where I had him, checkmate. He said, social justice and experimentation. Anyway.
So it's Jan's husband that has the videotape, right?
Yeah, he ended up turning to this. But the sort of point is, anyway, we're not going to make that, there's no way that mistake's going to be made, but it's just an example of how things go wrong. And if we had a critical discourse, if we had the person power, we would be critiquing these things. I mean, Richard's up for critique. He's cool with it.
Go ahead. I have a question about critical discourse.
My question is also about
please ask.
It's just you've brought it up several times, the losing of the critical discourse and the need to have a critical discourse. I would just ask you to elaborate on, to just unpack that, what the critical discourse and how does it happen and how does it interact with the work?
Yeah, I mean, I would say in the same way, writ large, we've lost theater criticism in this country. We don't have theater criticism, we have advertising. The theater world. It doesn't matter whether you're with Lincoln Center. Nobody's seriously writing about the theater piece. They, in San Francisco, they got the guy either cheering up out of his chair or bowled over in boredom. It's all about advertising. Well, that's that piece of it. But what we've lost in our circle internally is the willingness and the person power and the orientation. And, you can name any number of factors to critique each other. To just like John was doing when he came and saw that play of mine. He didn't, he was offering a critique. This is what I didn't see in the piece, this is what I'm concerned about. And so then we began to talk about that critique and what we could do with that critique. And what I see in our own field of roots, NPN, blah, 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 and John, believe me, and I went through it big time in the American Festival, is a refusal to hold each other accountable. There is not accountability in our field. Despite all the bullshit about justice, peace, etc., people don't even hold each other accountable to their actions. Just saw it all the time. And you raise it, and it's deflected in 100 ways. Well, so since we don't even have a frank critical discourse among ourselves, then we have no skill and no clarity to then become a critic of the Transformer Project on out. So, so not being organized in our own minds and in our own not being clear ourselves, then we can't even participate in a powerful way in the national discourse about cultural policy. And the cultural policy in this country is a de facto cultural policy, just like de facto segregation. In other words, it's not the law, there's no cabinet level cultural policy, but there's an obvious cultural policy in this country. And what's happened for the last 30 years is that a handful of us have tried to maintain an honest discourse about that cultural policy, not get reactionary, but to deal in a rational way. And that's why you hear John and I and a few other people philosophizing so much, which drove people crazy. Because what we were really trying to do was to talk about cultural policy.
I believe that this whole conversation is about race and class in the United States of America and our inability to confront it. So she actually brought something to the table that encouraged people to get a little more frank and honest. Right. But you're right, in many ways it doesn't happen, but I wonder, did you observe a shift from when it was happening in a very public way at any point in this history to where it's moved almost into this kind of personal, private banter?
Yeah, the marker for me is when Reagan was elected. Nixon was the biggest supporter of the NEA of any president, so you can't lay it to party in that way. And the NEA, I always argue that the NEA was like the Justice Department during the Civil Rights Movement, reluctant to support the law, but the best thing that the movement had. Similarly, the NEA reluctant to move towards democracy, but the best thing we had. And it was chiefly the division coming out of the Civil Rights Movement, which was expansion arts, led afterwards, after the founder, by A.B. Spellman, combining with Bess Hawes in the folk arts, which program, which is Bess is Alan Lomax's sister, and Alan Lomax coined the term cultural equity. And in 1977 was already drawing the line between cultural diversity and biological diversity and their interdependence, and showing how if one collapses, the other will collapse, or they will collapse together. That human diversity and biological diversity, is what he was saying, are codependent and will collapse together. So all this was out there, and when Reagan came in, they picked up the Heritage Foundation blueprint, which was, it's all spelled out. We knew it at the time. One, they're going to go after the two endowments. They are an instrument of the liberal left-wing agenda, and we're going to dismantle them. Second, we're going to dismantle the entire nonprofit sector, because the entire sector is not to our benefit. And they were moving towards, a theocracy was where the right wing was going on that. And then we're going to go in like we did in the 50s into the universities, and we're going to purge them again. And we're going to get rid of all that left liberal mess. Now, that was all laid out there. And what happened is that Hodsell came in at the NEA, Bill Bennett came in at National Endowment for the Humanities. And Bill Bennett sat there. Bennett, he became the drug czar. You see him on TV now. He's the guy that got busted for gambling online and all that. He's still a commentator. He came in and he functioned, I know this firsthand in many different ways, he functioned as a censor. He looked at all the grants that he inherited, and he didn't pay any attention except to what ideological line he imagined they were following. And the ones that didn't follow the ideological line that he believed in, which was the great Western tradition, nyet. Just like in common, nyet, no. And then the others, fine. And if he saw, I had a friend who was the head of the New Jersey Humanities Council. He gets this call from Bill Bennett. Don't like that grant you just approved. Want you to make sure it doesn't go forward. This guy says, what do you mean? I can't undo a panel decision. I'm just the chair of it. He said, undo it. Hung up. So that's Bill Bennett, you know, and he defined, from the little world I know, he defined political correctness. And in that perfect Republican paradigm said that I now, since I have just defined political correctness, I'm going to turn it over and say that the whole left, right, the whole liberal left, they're the politically correct ones. And I'm going to make them swallow it, hook, line, and sinker. And so that began the whole thing about political correctness. They launched the culture war. And, you know, the culture war put a lot of our work at risk, because I found myself in the position of having to support Karen Finley and her performance art on the basis of freedom of expression. But Karen Finley's work couldn't have been more out of touch with anything that our communities, and we were mainly poor white and working all communities of color, were interested in. I mean, you know, so we ended up supporting essentially.
You mean you wouldn't be interested in seeing her shit on stage and somebody come up and eat it?
It wasn't real shit. That was the problem. It was just chocolate. Otherwise, I'd have been right in for it. So, you know, so then.
Y'all was doing some wild stuff, man.
So then we
Don't
got.
sit y'all.
So then we got, you know, we had to defend that. And, you know, that was the culture war. Boop, 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 boop. And there was never any reciprocity. Those people who were all upper middle class white, they never did one thing for the rest of our group that was struggling about a little harder problems than the ability to poop on stage. You know? And we never got anything back, but so I mean, it's just, it was just Machiavellian how it unfolded. But that was the point for me. That's where I marked the point, because it was a conscious strategy. And of course, that's just picking a point to try to clarify.
It's a conscious strategy to eliminate the discourse, to protect your interests?
It was a strategy on their part to dominate the discourse, to take over the discourse, to dismiss any kind of democratic discourse, and to re-elevate the Western European. It's like the last gasp of imperialism is how, of colonialism. Imperialism is how some people looked at it. But I mean, the odd thing for me as a theater person is that just the luck of the draw, right? I'm born into this time where in diminishing decades, I'm less able to practice art, and I have to spend more and more time as a dissident sort of combating this policy. I mean, John and I would have much more enjoyed making 6 more plays than having to, you know, keep diagnosing and dicing and going to meetings and pushing back on this stuff and, you know, feeling like always stuck out on a limb. And, you know, I know all Barack Hussein and all those people, and, you know, they are all, you know, they are sort of compromising stuff themselves, and nobody's holding them accountable. And so, you know, when the air clears, there are just not that many people who stood true. And that's going to be true in any kind of deal. You know, people got to make a living. They're going to go here, going to go with the time. And so the discourse has somewhat, you know, been thinned down.
Yeah, but that's
to be expected.
Yeah, I mean, power concedes nothing without struggle. You know, and the people who have the power are going to struggle to extend their advantage. And, you know, that's a political question, to be sure, but it has consequence artistically, you know, because, well, to stay with Shakespeare for a moment, Shakespeare, my friend Ted Warren said of Shakespeare, he's my mentor as a writer.
Ted Warren is.
Yeah, Our Land. Did you ever read it yet?
Mm-hmm.
You found it?
Mm-hmm.
Do you like it?
Yeah, you sent it to me, yeah.
Yeah, Ted said of Shakespeare, he said, well, I have to tell you a little more of the story. Ted was, we were doing Our Land, and I was directing. And Ted knew, he wrote the play in 42, I believe. It was produced on Broadway in 47 and has been produced only a few times since then. And, but in 1975, it must have been, 74, 75, Ted came down as writer in residence to attend, I didn't know Ted before this, but he came down, and Ted knew every goddamn line of the play. and whenever anybody misquoted a line in rehearsal, Ted, by that time, he was more than a little drunk, because he had his first drink when he got up in the morning and poured Johnny Walker Red Label into his coffee with a little honey. And he kept that, by noon, that little half pint was gone, and he had him another one before 2 o'clock. And Ted, by this time of day in the evening, we had to work in the evening, he was fairly well kited. And so Ted would sit there in rehearsal, listening like this. That's not the way I wrote that line. And he quote the line. He said, "Tell them what to do. Tell them." I said, "Ted, they're just trying to find the play right now. They'll be all right." Got mad at me. I think if he had been less drunk, he might have hit me. But he'd been afraid he wouldn't have hit me. He'd have missed. But at any rate, I wanted to get Ted out of the way in these rehearsals. Having invited him down to be a writer in residence, I couldn't tell him to go back to Chicago. So this lady did Shakespeare in Modern Dress. Can't remember her name.
Modern Dress.
Yeah, and she did it in the schools, went down to the schools doing Shakespeare's plays in contemporary dress. And she was here doing a residence, and somebody told her about our work, and she came over to the theater that night. I said, I know exactly what to do. She was about 80 like Ted was. I'll hook them up. She was an attractive 80-year-old woman. And Ted had been married to a white woman, so I figured he might find her attractive. So I was going to send them out to have a good time.
So you can get some work done.
So I get some work done. And I said, Ted, this is whatever her name. She was a Czech or Serbian, I don't remember what. I said, she does Shakespeare in Modern Dress. Ted looked at her and said, why the hell would anyone want to do Shakespeare today? My plan was gone.
It's complicated matters.
Tremendously. So it was a mess, but I lost my point. But,
Well, that was it.
No, that was...
All I can see is nothing without struggle.
Yeah, and so all those people, I mean, are trying to put work forward that supports their philosophical and political and economic and social agenda. People who go to the regional theaters grew up as a way of taking the theater away from the New York and building up. It got converted into a tryout thing, you know,
where they go out to New York.
Yeah, and they pulled it right back into the services, and it's kind of a mess. But the alternative is not to be developed in dialogue with those people. We have to seize control of the agenda, of the dialogue, build it up from our relationships and our work with each other, and continue to open up new doors for people to come into. That's why Roots was so valuable in its early stages. I'm not so sure what Roots is into now, but we lost something, and I'm not sure what it is. you know. I think it's worth fighting for, you know.
I think it alludes back to what Dudley said earlier, is the fact that now we're making art for each other, as opposed to really having the carpenter and the whoever in there as the community agents. We think of ourselves as our own communities.
But as
a lot of times,
as a means of survival in the world that is degrading that you talked about, Roots stopped to turn internally at its own identity and saying, we can't move forward looking like this anymore as well. It's another step that I think it made in terms of pushing again outwards, which is to look at racial identity within the organization, and had made a lot of the efforts of the organization turn internally to deal with, I feel like, who's at the table.
That's not bad if it breathes, you know. If you move over here to, I mean, if it's raining on the roof, you move over to fix that. And if that opens up a crack in the floor, you move over there. But you don't lose sight that the whole house is what we got to live in. You know what I'm saying? We gotta keep moving and punching and backing off, defend, punch, defend.
What was so valuable? You just said a little. That's what I think was so valuable about Roots.
We went through a whole period during, when was that? When Ruby started inviting those critics to come down.
Into the 80s.
Yeah, was that the end of the 80s?
Yeah, we went pretty much maybe to, I don't know when she left.
Yeah.
But in the 80s to.
Yeah, we started bringing
early.
critics in, and not those top line critics, you know, who were in the New York Times and stuff, but people are serious students of the forms, and they had some currency. They were people whose names you would know if I could think of them, but they would come and they would just hang out with us, and we'd begin, and we'd argue. I mean, no, that's, don't care if you are a big critic from somewhere. You know, that's not what I'm trying to do. So, and then we started trying to figure out, you know, what the role of critics in our work had to be, or in art should be. I mean, we were more aggressive than that. We didn't say just our work, we said in art. Because as I said earlier, I really believe that this is the most important art that's going on in the country, and perhaps in comparable people in the Western world, you know? Because we're trying to do something here that is genuinely needed by the culture, not something that's needed by the people who make money off of it. And that being the definition of that, it's good. So we were trying to build up a corpus of critical work. When I was chair, we tried to get instruments like the newsletters of the various, like the Morris Dees' organization, what is that? Southern Poverty Law Center. Get them to publish critical writing, you know, so that their constituency, which was considerable and still is, could start thinking, oh, that's the kind of theater piece we ought to have in our community, and not Alabama Shakespeare, you know, and as opposed to Alabama Shakespeare and so forth. And there's lots of other journals of that type. Southern Arts, the things, Southern Studies, Institute for Southern Studies, ISS. Southern Exposure. That would be a good place to publish stuff. The Highlander newsletter, that would be a good place to put critical evaluations and help people. And if we did that, even now, if we did that kind of stuff now, it would open up venues for the work to be done and to be seen, you know? Or even if it didn't open up venues, it would open up audiences, so that when you went to Birmingham or wherever, and advertise saying in those newsletters, we're going to be in Birmingham. Right. Here's our touring schedule for the next 6 months.
This was based on an analysis that what you saw in the progressive political movement was conservative attitudes towards culture.
Yeah.
And the reason being is because, in our analysis, is because culture is so powerful that the power base could concede politics, could negotiate politics. Everything was negotiable but culture. They had to keep control of that. Mm-hmm. And I tell this story that I heard that somebody said that's too perfect to be true, but it is. That during the 2000 election, this reporter in Florida comes up to these two guys doing a story on what people are thinking's at stake in the Bush election, 2000 election. Two guys retired sitting by the pool, says, what's at stake? And first guy says the economy, the second guy says, and the Supreme Court. And then both of them say together, and the culture. And the reporter says, well, I understand the economy, the right versus the liberal conservative economy, the Supreme Court. I understand, what do you mean by the culture? And the guys finish each other's sentence. Who controls the culture controls the story the country tells itself, the nation tells itself. So they can concede anything but that. Mm-hmm. That's the master narrative. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing we're working on. And what happened at Roots, in my view, is on the internal critical discourse, is we didn't have a formal way to step back and say, look, we all love each other. Now let's try to understand what's happening here in the organization. Let's just step back, take the time to do that, to get everybody's point of view. Let's not feel like we got to do the next program and make the next play. Let's just take time out and reflect. Whatever time, if it takes 6 months, let's take the whole and whatever. And what we would have figured out at that, one of the things we would have been able to bring to consciousness was the fact that in the South, there was such a dearth of opportunity for the gay community to be out and together, that became this huge need. And Roots was satisfying that need. Now, that didn't happen to be what we founded Roots around, because it was around social justice. But it was this huge need, that it was so huge that it had sort of underneath taken over the organization. And that would have been fine if we could have clarified that. Then, like, I could have gotten in support of that through Roadside Theater in the Appalachians, whatever, but we never got clear about what was really controlling the agenda. So we pretended that social justice was controlling the agenda when really the energy was on this other need, this other issue. So we never got the internal. So then there was a lot of struggle around what direction for the organization to take, and it didn't have to be a win-lose, either social justice or gay issues. I mean, we just needed to be clear, and then we could have worked together.
I'm confused about why you're separating gay justice with social justice.
Well, we would have, if we'd have gotten clear about that being the issue, then we could have said, this is part of the struggle for social justice. This is the piece this is where the majority of people want to place the struggle right now, and that's what we'll do. So I'm not separating.
No, I think it's a lack of transparency, which breeds lack of trust.
Okay. But you're absolutely right. And what John and I were concerned about was race and class, rather than those issues. But it was absolutely a social justice issue, and we could have gotten fully behind it. and would have been happy to.
But needed that conversation to happen.
Right. So what was happening is they were saying, oh yeah, we're all about race and class struggle.
Kind of.
Sort of.
Because it wasn't clear.
Because it
wasn't clear.
So anyway, we never got any clear strategies. So that was the internal thing breaking down. And then from there, because all these other things, it never got clear, and so we never got a powerful. And that was the internal piece. And so being weak internally, being unclear internally, then we didn't have the clarity to be as forceful externally as we needed to be.
What you're saying echoes what Nick said at that last State of the Nation meeting, which was like what Roots ought to do or could do would be to take a year off all of its programming.
I said that.
Oh.
No, I just want to announce that.
Yeah,
It's Carlson.
and just
Been
figure
saying
himself
that to
out.
us for a long time. That we don't take the time to analyze. We had a meeting recently when we were talking about this festival that we have for next week called State of the Nation. And we were analyzing the way we work and where is power held and how are we working and how do we invite people into our group and how is this sustainable, and based around an incident that happened where an outsider, in particular a black woman, came into this group and did not feel like she knew how we were working and felt isolated. And we're making the point that we don't work in a way right now that allows us to practice the values that we want to be practicing, because it is chaotic and it is not our central focus. It's one of many things that we do programmatically, and everyone's scrambling as organizations to get a million things done. So.
But this whole area of critical discourse is major. How do you get better if you don't criticize? You know.
And a follow-up question, just based on like what you said, is like the need to have that discourse so that you can, as you say, get better, but also what needs to be in place for that discourse to be able to happen and to happen frankly. And were you able, from this moment, Dudley, where you felt that things sort of started to fall apart and that discourse was lost, were you able to identify what could be put in place or what you needed to change so that it would be facilitated, so that people would be more open and frank and those conversations could occur? Like, what could change to have that happen? I don't know if that makes any sense.
Well, I'll take a hit on that. I think just in terms of criticism, the critic who tells me that my work will be of little interest to white middle-class theater goers in New York City is not being helpful, because that's not what I'm trying to do. We can go on and generate examples of that sort, but the idea is that for the critique to be useful, it has to be trying to achieve the same objectives that the artist is trying to achieve and that the audience is trying to achieve. So if the artist is going this way and the audience is going that way and the artist is doing this,
Critic, yeah.
and the critic, yeah, right, that's what I'm trying to say. It's not going to happen. So the first requirement is clarity about what the goals are. You know, just like what the mission is, you know, which is why I'm so disappointed that David Cuthbert is not being replaced at the newspaper here, because he figured that out with lots of arguments and stuff, but he figured it out. And my job is not to send these theater people off to New York or to Los Angeles, or even to recruit Los Angeles, Hollywood folks to come here to make movies. If they do, fine, but that's not his job. His job is to strengthen the community of audiences here so that they are better served by the artists here who are trying to generate work. And the newspaper didn't understand that before. I don't think they understand it now. But as advocates for the arts, we ought to advocate for that. You know, for critics who understand what their role is. Not that they necessarily like everything we do. That's not the job. It's to build the resource for the community to strengthen its own grasp on its own efforts to improve itself in the social historical context that exists here.
So way more than just opinionated thought.
Yeah, it's about values, and it's making us all stronger. You know.
So if you know, to get to the Roots example, what we could have done, like the timeout, if you had come in and watched Roots and said, oh, I see what's happening here. You got one group, you're all concerned about social justice, but you got one group that's talking about race and class. That was the founding. It was founded at Highlander. They were all, but what you've had emerge is this issue of gay and lesbian rights and life, and that's you know, that's the social justice that the majority are concerned about. All you all need to do now is just be clear about that and start working on, you know, get a consensus that that's what you're going to do for X amount of time. Then you can start bringing race and class into that struggle, because, you know, that's where the energy is. But we didn't have that clarity, that simple clarity. And we didn't have a process that rocked us back enough or brought someone in who could help us make the diagnosis. So we were like lost in the forest, right? Couldn't see the whole, I mean, lost among the trees and couldn't see really what was happening. That's what happens time and time again. So you have to set up a mechanism that draws you back. I mean, we were trying consciously to work on the problem. We brought people like Alan Bolt came in from Nicaragua. He's very helpful because the first thing he saw, he said, my goodness, here you all are, these artists that are concerned about making work for the mass of people. You know, your audience is 85% of the Americans versus the 15%. And yet your work is so little. John, you're doing a one-person show. You know, why is your work so little, one person, and you're reaching the whole man? Or Roadside, you know, you've got 3 people. But, you know, why, what's this about? You know, just, and so that, you know, so that was something.
That's what he said.
And so that, that kind of critique, that's what I'm saying about the critical discourse. We didn't do enough of it, and we.
I agree, and I think that what has happened is throughout the evolution of that in Roots has been that people have come to the organization, have been attracted to the organization because of it being a safe space for the homosexual, you know, lesbian, gay issues that aren't really people who are interested in broader social justice.
We diagnosed that. We took a survey. I said, well, let's, you know, I was like Maurice. I mean, I was a young Maurice back then. I didn't play the horn, but I was on to the facts. Can we get some facts here? And so we had this survey at the annual meeting, and we didn't know who the membership was from a socioeconomic point of view. Hell, it turned out that 3/4 of the membership was rich. And they came there, it was like they were slumming when they came there. They had these huge incomes. And we're saying, oh, damn. And now I understand why they don't want to do what Carla just said. They got big bank accounts. They're not in the same boat we're in. You know, so it was like, exactly. And then, so John and I, you know, we said, well, we can't deal with this anymore. We're going to start something called the American Festival. And we're only going to bring people in that we know are committed.
And poor.
And poor. And so we formed that coalition as a way to, you know, we couldn't deal with this other, so we formed that. And I guess the mistake we made was we didn't keep enough control over it. So we didn't provide enough leadership would be another way. So we spread the, you know, by then it got to be a coalition of maybe, what, 10 or 11 companies from around the country. Jale's one, Urban Bushwomen. And what we found out then is, John said something really true, I think, this morning about these processes. If you look at the Roadside Company or the Junebug Company, not everybody was anything like on the same page that John and I were. I mean, there were people in the Junebug, which was sort of a pickup company, I guess you would say, and the Roadside was more permanent. But still, there were people who didn't share our analysis. They didn't care about social justice past the point. Well, we found the same thing in the American Festival. That, you know, everybody said that's what they, when we handpicked them, so, you know, we checked it all out. But as it turned out, that wasn't the bottom line for a lot of the groups. So when we would raise issues contingent to that concern, no, that's not it. The thing is, we need money to do our work. You know, so people said, no, you all have been getting all the money. We need money to do our work. Don't talk about, you know, don't go on and on about this bigger stuff. So that then went bluey after, you know, over a decade of really powerful work. And so, you know, there's a longevity thing. I mean, when we founded Roots, you know, I was in on the founding of it. And we said in, I don't remember, I think we said in 5 years we will disband. And it'll be automatic. And it'll come back up or not, but we will not perpetuate.
So what time span was the ATF?
AFT.
AFT, I'm sorry.
AFT.
AFT.
What does that stand for?
It began,
American Festival Project.
yes, it began in 1981 in San Francisco with Teatro Campesino, Junebug, Roadside, Traveling Jewish Theater. 4 groups that we pulled together for the People's Theater Festival. It's a huge festival. And then a dozen other companies local. Robert Bly was there. We had a whole humanities component. I mean, that's the other thing that it would be hard for you all to understand how much wind under our sails we had back then. I mean, it was not, we were able to pull off that kind of major festival in '81 that you couldn't even imagine hitting that scale now. I mean, this was a 3-week festival, a huge humanities piece, a huge performance piece. I mean, Campesino, that's Luis Valdez out of the Farm Workers, his piece ran for 5 weeks. His piece was created from when we were sitting up at 3 in the morning drinking, he was smoking a cigar and we were carrying on. And out of seeing the analogy between the corridos and the Appalachian jacktails. And he said, I got it. Took a big puff and created that play. And so, you know, there was all this working at it. Mm-hmm. I mean, we were spending a lot of time with each other. I mean, you know, John came up and lived in the mountains for 2 months every summer for a period. I mean, it was just spending a lot of time. Yeah, and staying up late. And so, I mean, we just had, there were a lot of possibilities then that you all are just inherited such a suppressed situation. And, you know, there's no way you can know what it feels like to have that kind of wind under your sails, to have things breaking your way like that. You know, you can't, because you haven't.
Yeah, and that, you know, you're talking about it in a kind of personal, intimate way, but the reality is that the larger reality that's a part of, let me put that, is that the civil rights movement had built a huge following.
That's right.
the peace movement had built a huge following. They overlapped each other. The human rights movement was on the rise. The gay and lesbian movement was on the rise, and was seen as complementary forces, all these forces. And every time you turn around, there was another meeting in which you see and meet new people, see the old people and meet new people, and so there was a rich dialogue going on. You didn't hear people in our wing of the discussion anyway, saying that artists are the leaders of the political movement, which I hear a lot now, that it's our job as artists to lead the political movement. Our job was to try to understand the political movement and to reflect it and help the movement build its constituency through our work. And so it was, and the government, when they decided they were going to get us, they didn't aim at the arts. They did secondarily, but they aimed at putting the civil rights workers in jail or running them out of the country. They aimed at putting the peaceniks in jail or running them out of the country. They aimed at they had a little trouble aiming at the human rights people because they were a new contributor to the force, and they were kind of careful in the language that they used. They tucked that thing under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and they were legalistic in a certain kind of way. The rest of us were just saying, "Fuck this," and so forth. But that movement got aborted and it never achieved the force it could have achieved because we didn't know enough about what we were doing. That's what it boils down to. We didn't even know that we had history. We didn't know about the Southern Tenant Farmers Union and all that kind of work that was going on in the South until we began to meet people who were involved in those days and in those places. But the continuity between the Southern Tenant Farmers Union and the Federation of Southern Cooperatives was very tenuous because they didn't know. The younger people didn't know what the older people had been doing. And what they learned as a result. And so what gets communicated is the confusion about that, or even worse, the agenda that the academics and the government wish. They want to create the narrative, to borrow your term. They want to create the narrative that people then study, learn, and employ in their work, which is the conversion of the thing into its opposite. And so we got a big job to do.
So as long as things were trending, if you use that word, in our direction, then it was easy to pull the American Festival Coalition together. As soon as the trend or that wind under it started collapsing in the historical circumstances, then there wasn't enough grit to stick with it. The reason there wasn't enough grit is because we didn't know enough to push it, to clarify. We didn't reflect enough. We just didn't do the work. So
with that analysis right there, so right now we have a huge contingency of people who's talking about ecological or the ecosystem, environmental movement. We have this movement around immigration and that whole thing. We have this movement around the economy, right? Would it be to our purpose or to our
detriment, or
would it be instrumental for us to use that analysis that you just used as riding that wave, and really taking the opportunity to ride the wave that it is now, and make it as relative as possible as a strategy of building the ultimate potential for this. You know what I'm saying? The kinetic potential. I mean, making it kinetic by tapping into these waves and really doing some research on the beginning of it, right? About tapping into these waves that we're talking about that exist right now. Would that be smart?
I don't. Yeah, it's interesting because I don't understand what you put in the wind in those sails. You put in funding, or you put in people resources.
Civil rights movement.
Yeah. So you come in. The wind that John's referring to is all of these movements. So
right.
Funding's just following the.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about the lift was coming out of this, and this whole history that really you can
even
market
in the early '80s.
You can market in 1890 with the rise
it's
of
always
populism.
True. It's always true.
Yeah.
You're familiar with populism and its relationship to the earlier the theater movement we learned about at Cornell.
Little theater movement.
Little theater
grassroots
movement.
theater movement.
Every time the people start moving, culture rises up to meet them because it's coming out of them. You know, populist movement is problematic, but it was still what was available at that time. You know, the mass movement that was happening. You know, of course, then we got Huey Long, who came in as a populist and went out as a thief.
Same, Huey Long,
Huey, Earl, then Eddie.
But I mean, to your question, Maurice, I think I would definitely be talking to those folks and, trying to figure out how to connect and I mean, that was, as you know as well as anybody, that was Miles Horton's analogy was you gotta keep paddling till the wave builds, and if you're paddling along, you got a chance of catching it and contributing, and at the moment. So I think it's right.
What was your strategy for when it sounds like you keep talking about consistently hitting these walls in the work and finding places where there was a blockage, and so then you go on and you make something else. What other than creating a whole nother entity are some strategies that you learned about how to, as you say, stay true and remain a dissident and progress the work forward? I mean, do you always stop at the group that doesn't agree and move on to something else with the people that share your worldview, or do you sit and strategize at the table with people who don't share your worldview?
Not too much to be gained in that, but not that you don't want to recruit new people. We don't share a whole worldview here, but we've been working together for years. I'm thinking of you guys now. We don't share a worldview on every point, but we work together for years. Sometimes we come closer on a point that we've been arguing on for years. Sometimes we say, well, we'll leave that on the table and we'll come back to it in the future, and you work on something else. And then you wait for another good idea to happen. Maybe your partner has a good idea, maybe somebody else has a good idea. On the American Festival, one of the biggest of them was right here when we did environmental justice, the Environmental Justice Festival. We tried to build strong relationships with a bunch of community organizations that were working on environmental racism and use the building of this festival as a way to get, but we didn't have the money to make it happen. In order for it to work, it would have required bringing, for at least 2-3 weeks at a time, 7 companies into town to work with 7 to 14 different community organizations. 2 and 3 at a piece, you know. That's how urban bushwomen got hooked up with the Institute, People's Institute. That's how, and Carpetbag got hooked into a couple of community organizations here that were using youth, what's that youth program? Youth poverty program that they have?
Carpetbag?
Yeah, no, not Carpetbag, but it's a national program that was using young people as organizers, training them to organize, and that's where their piece Nothing Nice came from. And some of them work better than others and so forth, but we built them up that way, built up those connections that way by building relationships with organizations that saves the artist from the narrowness of his or her particular vision. Because they are getting stories from the communities that they're working with. And we tried our best to find a white organization to get Roadside and Zuni to work with, but we didn't have good relations with white organizations at the time, so they came in and just hung with whoever was available and helped make stuff happen over there. It took us 7 years to make that thing happen. So we did that for 7 years.
Oh, so you helped work on the Zuni Project too?
I was around while they were here.
Gotcha.
My job was not to go help them do their work. It was just to try to create the possibility for it to occur.
But Junebug became, you know, an inspiration to the theater company, and Dalla went out there and performed in Zuni and was a big, you know, big hit out there. And then it got them thinking about their mythological stories about the first black man Zuni had ever seen, Esteban. You know, so I mean, yeah, it was all in the mix.
Yeah.
But I mean, what we were always doing, sort of back a little bit to your question, was we were never letting ourselves get pigeonholed. As soon as they tried to say we were one thing, we would jump out of the box. I mean, that was constant. I mean, I can remember after Roadside first was off Broadway, there was this whole thing to make us famous. I mean, people were talking about going to Hollywood. I mean, people wanted to be the agent to get us to Hollywood, this, that, and the other. You know, this whole thing was going on. You know, we're not going to be that. As soon as they wanted to say we were storytelling theater, we'd jump out of that box. Whatever box they were putting us in, we jumped out of it. I mean, that was the mode. So at the same time, anytime they just tried to say, well, you all just do this, we'd say, no, we'd show them we do something else. Likewise, when we were trying to figure out ways to work on the same goals, the same principles we concerned, if we were batting our head up against the wall, we'd try something else. And, you know, like John said, something else would appear. And, you know, I mean, it's just like this has appeared. This is the same piece of work. That's why we're sitting here.
Right.
Because this has appeared. 1,000 Kites appeared. You know, same piece of work. I mean, this is, you know, so whatever strategy we were on before we were sitting here about this, or before 1,000 Kites, we were, you know, attuned, looking for where the next opportunity would be to try to get to the same place we've been trying to get to for 30-some years, to struggle for.
And we constantly try to stay on the lookout for our brothers and our sisters, you know. When a veteran of the Free Southern Theater came down to Jazz Fest one time, and I happened to be performing that weekend. She came over with her husband to see what we were doing. Said, call us up. We're up at Cornell. We want to do something. First thing I know, I had a gig at Cornell under their auspices. Right. I'm up there doing a nice little 3-day gig. And the chairman of the theater department says, I can't remember the guy's name. Bruce. but the guy was in the music program doing world music.
Mm.
He was a balafon orchestra,
Oh, yeah.
and we never got him into the festival, but he had hooked Bruce up and said, you ought to have this dude come up here. And I told Bruce came to me after the show one night and said, I want you to come up. And I said, well, Bruce, you know, what are you thinking about? I thought he was talking about another gig. When we got through talking, it was a 3-year contract. And including in the second year, an American Theater Festival. And in the third year, a new community development program. He just didn't say no to anything. He said, I thought I was getting a way to open up my new theater, and it ended up costing me $300,000. But everybody got a piece of work out of that, you know, and we all got to hang together and work together and strengthen our unity, you know, and so
turned into a 5-year project, 5 to 6.
Yeah, and we got a bunch of students. The young, when we went to Dartmouth, the same right after that, Shimmy, y'all all know Shimmy. Yeah, Shimmy was at Dartmouth, and came out of that program because of the experience she had at the American Theater Festival at Dartmouth. And we got a lot of people like that. Shimmy just happened to be one that's still around and still doing.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So now when we were just doing that show in the Bronx in November, woman comes, PhD student, drove down from Cornell to see the show because her doctoral thesis is on intercultural work. And she she had no knowledge of what we did at Cornell, had no knowledge that the whole little theater and grassroots theater movement had begun at Cornell and spread from there around the country. And this was the history informing her thesis. And
it was totally missing out of history from her. And she didn't know anything about it.
And it wasn't her, it's totally disappeared.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm
from
saying.
the institution.
Right.
When we discovered the history, it took us months to find in the Cornell archive all the papers that started this major national theater movement that won Pulitzer Prizes. I mean, it wasn't like it didn't surface to the mainstream consciousness. It did. Huh?
When was that?
Started in the 20s, about 1918.
They weren't part of it.
But if you're engaged, you naturally run into the other people who are on the same trail.
Right. And
that's the win that Dudley was talking about. You get engaged and you find the people, you know, and you have to be sensitive as well as generous. You're not losing anything by giving somebody else a piece of the action. You know, you're making us all stronger. You know, including the critical element that is missing is the element that represents the audience. You know, and that is where the community organizations come from. That's so key. If we don't do a good job of building relationships with the people, not by taking over the political work as our own and breaking up, dividing their constituency, no, take our work and share it with them to help them do what they're doing. And it all grows that way, you know, it all grows.
So be well in your growth.
I have a question that maybe is obvious for Carlton, Bruce, Maurice, and Nick about what you personally more out of this work?
You mean all four of the guys?
Individually, yeah.
Well, I think I already stated mine.
So what do you want to get?
That's what I want.
No, what do you want to get for yourself? What do you want to have happen from race?
That is it. The evolution of the human spirit is what I'm here for. That's gonna help me out, because it'll get me to zoom a little bit further. I really do think that all of our consciousness and all of our plural spirits are tied together. And until all of us can to reach some level, I can't go no further with mine.
Well, what could
So
be
that's my, you know.
What could be the personal transformation for you in this process? As that's happening for other people, let's assume that is going to happen for other people, that goal is going to be achieved. What, in order to get to that goal, what transformation could you personally, individually experience?
I can leave that fight alone so I can work on something else. More close to my personal evolution. And that's seriously how I think of it.
I don't understand how you guys expect individuals and communities to have an evolution and a transformation if you're not stating what the potential of your own personal one is in the process of this work. You want to do this work so that you can get back to your own personal transformation, but you're asking individuals who receive the work and the community receiving the work to have an individual transformation. That seems a little backward to me.
How so?
Because I think you have to have one of your own. You have to be.
I've had mine on this level. I really feel that I've had mine on this particular level. You feel what I'm saying? So to be able to bring some people to that point of clarity that I feel I've achieved. I might be wrong. I might be totally wrong. I might be arrogant in saying that. But to bring people to that point of clarity of the way that I think, that the movement should be, as far as an evolutionary movement of spirit, then I can go on to another level of it. And that's how I feel about it for myself, for my personal transformation. I mean, that might still, does that not make any sense?
It makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know if it satisfies me, but that's my thing, not yours.
For me, it's realizing that we're in a space where, like Uprooted really spoke volumes about our ability to have conversations about race.
Ability or inability?
Yeah, our inability to have conversations, and even when we have conversations, how we bring so many assumptions to the table that we take as our own personal truth, that have not been vetted against other people's truth, as it pertains to race and the relationship that we have with each other. And I think that is a struggle that we share with many communities around the country. This is just a microcosm of a much larger systemic problem. So it's like, we were not able to get back into those conversations to a level that brought us to any clarity about what it was that we were doing and how what we were doing in that room was, tied to our understanding of racial dynamics. And so for me, it's about how do we continue to do work that for me is very socially charged. I write, a lot of stuff I write is about, my understanding as being a black man in the United States, in the South, in Mississippi, that inherently is going to be charged with a lot of racial overtones and undertones. And how do I process that to where I'm not just coming off as the mad black dude in the room, but that it's educated, it's informed, and it also understands the perspective that my brethren and my sisterin are bringing to the room, and bringing it to the conversation. So for me, it's about creating a tool that I can use in my everyday understanding of racial dynamics in my life and in my organizing and my art making, but also hopefully hopefully in the process to create a tool that others can use as well. Because I know I don't know it all, and I know I got a lot of shit to learn about race and about how it affects. Oh, John, I'm sorry. I don't know it all, brother.
I was told the story the other day about getting confused and disoriented, and I was so disappointed. I thought you had it together. Now you're telling me again.
I guess mine is that first and foremost that I share a pretty abiding love with these gentlemen, that I really feel personally close to them, and that the occasion to be able to share in work about a topic that I feel like I have a lot of work to do on is a big one. Like that I can really feel like I can get called on my shit by these gentlemen, and vice versa, and that it never comes from personal business. Like it's not aggressive. It's not about person. It's not about attack. It's like growth. So that's one of them, and I haven't found so many people that I feel like I can do that with in a trustworthy way. And that, yeah, I really do feel like I have a lot of shit to unpack. Racial, like with regards to racism and my growing up in southern Louisiana, and especially in a small town in southern Louisiana, you know, and what I would consider a progressive household, but still looking at it just being like, what was all that, you know? And so just really, it's just always, it's at the forefront of the thoughts of trying to process through and figure out what that means, and realizing that John O'Neill pointed out to me, as he's pointed out a couple times, that I sometimes find myself in the position of being an organizer of something, or working with people towards finding money for something, or going out and doing things, and that with that type of work comes a position of a certain power dynamic, and that you really have to check yourself, you know, and I have to check myself about the fact that I'm always find myself in that position, and really consider what that means in terms of me being a white man. And then I for this piece, one big personal stake is that I really don't understand or get the whole effort to separate this idea that there's work that can directly address social issues, and there's work that is aesthetically challenging and artistic, and I just can't. I just really see that we can do work at a very, very high level that directly addresses a social issue and doesn't skate around it, that says it's about a project about race and class, and that it can be just as intriguing and interesting, you know? And that, like, I feel a real burning passion to be able to synthesize those ideas together a little more, you know?
I'm open. I make like no demands upon myself, or I'm not seeking any sort of like, well, this is the person, this is the transformation I am seeking. You know, I'm putting myself, out there with everybody else, and, something's gonna happen. But I'm not, I'm not in disagreement with anything that I've already heard. But
well, I feel like I need to address the question too, because I feel like I'm part of this group.
Yeah.
You are part of this group. And for me, the goal is to, what I expect to get out of it is a deeper understanding and view about how to meet the technological changes that are unfolding, because all these guys have highly developed skills in those areas. And I expect to know more about it when I get through, as a result of this relationship. And it's crucial for me, because theater is so expensive from the audience perspective, and I am deeply concerned about trying to find ways to make the experience of participating in theater from the point of view of an audience less expensive, and having video products having access to the internet, having all those things seem to me to be related to this question of how do we make our work more effective for a longer time for less per unit cost. And that seems crucial to me. And I'm really hoping to develop my understanding of how that works and what we could do to accomplish those kinds of goals.
I think for me a big thing that I'm personally interested in that really ties in too with just what I'm working on a lot with Roadside and in the field. I'm really interested to see if we can sort of pass the baton or relink the knowledge around this other narrative, and whether we can make this cumulative. So I can pretty much know the history beginning with populism in the 1890s, and I can see the line of this work that we're doing and that you're picking up from about 1890 to now. And so I'm really interested in this idea of and what we had to do in Roadside. If you look at our plays, we had our history was co-opted by the dominant power. And what we did in the first series of our plays was reestablish through our plays a people's history of Central Appalachia. So we actually were putting a new the people's history narrative back in place and on the stage. So the play John saw, he was Red Fox, and what that was about the watershed moment when industrialists came into the mountains, as John said, and dominated the culture for the next 100 years. And there were two narratives about those events. One was the written history, written by the industrialists, which made the hillbillies stuck in a backwater, unable to do anything but interbreed, and until this enlightenment of industrialization came in.
Yeah, it was just dumb till we got there.
And freedom from that. And then there was a people's history that was all about resistance. And the hero of the play, and it's based all on oral histories, it's very factual. It's like an investigative journalism piece. So we actually reestablished this history both on fact and in a aesthetically compelling narrative. And it was about the resistance and the trepidation about the industrialists coming in and big money, as it says in the play, is driving out a natural way of life. So the economy becoming the dominance of the mountains there on out for the few. And we did it in just great historical detail. So for example, we went in and looked at all the census records from the previous 5 years to when the industrialists came in, tracked them 5 years out, so for a decade. And what we found, for example, was that people were not stuck in a backwater. They were living there intentionally to avoid the capitalist system, and that when capitalism came in, there was a huge out-migration out of the region to get away from the capitalism. They went to the Ozarks and then eventually to Indian Territory, Oklahoma. That's a more complicated story. But the point was, why that story was important is because we were recreating our own history, of people's history. So the next play picked up where that one was, just chronologically, as we made this new history. And then, like I said, once we had our history, we had, the point was, now we got our history, we got to join our history with the history of black people in the South. That's a joined history. You know, we get, now that we've sort of got our thing together, let's join and make the bigger history. And that's how we got working with groups across the country, because we were trying, the Native American group, we were trying to make a new American history, a new U.S. history narrative. That's what we were doing. And it was very, very conscious. The Chicano people were doing the same thing, et cetera, et cetera. We were all working on reclaiming this history, retelling this history, and then working on making a meta-narrative of it. I mean, and we look to do it in the South with Roots, nationally with American Festival, internationally with Voices. And it just, I mean, we had three fronts clearly in our mind: the local, where it was all based, the South, the national, and the international. And it was all 4 fronts. Yeah, 4 fronts, counting the local. So like we were just, you know, so like the enlightenment that would come to us from Africa, for example, about our own little business in this country, you know, was just like, I can remember just, now I see. I mean, I had never studied African history, but to hear it from African people was the most powerful way, you know, more powerful than any book I could pick up, or as powerful as any book. And that's what was going on, you know. He was sitting with people like M.U.G.A.B.E.E. and just hearing it straight out of his mouth. So, you know, I'm just interested in, you know, whether this stuff can be cumulative, you know, how it can be passed on, how you guys may. And that would be, of course, the most satisfying thing for anybody to have happen, is for others to pick up the struggle, the things you care about. Nothing could be, you know, that's why people care more than anything about their children. Because they see them as, and however you think of children.
When I asked that question, it's just an image came into my mind, and I'm just saying it because it was powerful in my mind. It seems like you guys coming out of the Katrina Project, even the longer history of coming out of Junebug. I don't think anyone has this false pretense that you're gonna solve or heal racism, but you're gonna experience some work on it, on an individual level and on a community level, with everyone that's involved, and then the audiences and the communities that you're in. And it seems like, from what I even knew about the Katrina Project when it was happening, we struggle as artists sitting in a room with kind of different approaches about how we're gonna get the work done. Like, even sometimes we're skewed about what we think the task is at hand, which I think is why, John, your questions about, here's 3 questions, start right there. But how we want to experience the work for ourselves. And I think for me, I think we have to make ourselves vulnerable to it, which is why I asked that question of you. And when I asked it, the image that came into my mind was, you know, if the work was to swim across a certain body of water, there are some people that would gear up, put on a wetsuit, grab their scuba tank, like they would be like, what's the fastest, most efficient way I'm gonna get across this water? All the way to the other extreme, that some people would take off every piece of clothing that they have to experience the sensation of that water. I mean, I'm assuming you all have been naked in a body of water, even if it's just a bathtub at some point. And it's a very different sensation than being in water with any kind of layer outside of your skin. Make the work vulnerable to you, or yourself vulnerable to it?
I think that it's all about expansion. I think that's why I'm here. I think for me it's about me expanding, and I guess it's about the work expanding. It's about all of it expanding. So I don't know in what direction necessarily, or what I'm going to find once as we continue to expand, as I continue to expand, because I'm not there yet. But I think that's why I'm in the room, and that's why I'm drawn to this project. It seems like the right step.
Well, what Joanna just said really.
That's why she wanted to go second, so she could still.
No, I was gonna say something. I was gonna say something for myself, but I just wanted to say also that what Joanna said, I just thought was really beautifully put and really resonates. And that I would have similar hopes, and I guess I'm interested in exploring, like, on a personal. This was a question on a personal level, like, for me, what possibilities for understanding and for personal transformation do, like, embodying these questions and addressing them aesthetically open up as a, like, in addition to conversation. And I don't know if this is an appropriate time to bring this up also, but it's been really interesting listening to you all talk and continually coming back to wanting to do, like, this analysis and exploration of race and class, and it's been mentioned, like, you do keep on talking about also how you're all men, and I think that there's just such amazing possibility to incorporate gender into this piece as well. And I don't mean, like, gender in terms of, like, not in terms of, like, bringing women in, but there's such extraordinary stuff to mine around masculinity and how that is tied to race and class. And I'm sure this is things that this isn't new to you guys, but it just keeps sort of bubbling up for me, like, throughout this conversation.